All right, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome back to our continuing Mastering RMM series. As we've had almost all of last week and most of this week so far, we have CJ back. Today, we're primarily going to be talking about scripting again, variables with scripting, and tomorrow is our big webinar. So while we try to answer as many questions as we have here, that is really what tomorrow is also for, which is to come in, bring in your deep questions. We'll have a number of PMs on that tomorrow, but myself and Amit, I think you've met in the past, CJ, a few others, and we'll be able to get to those questions. So just to remind you to please join us tomorrow for the deep webinar session. And CJ, please take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. And thank you all of you for joining today. So our intentions today are to pick up where we left off yesterday. So if you joined yesterday's session, you may have experienced some of the delays that we were having in getting the scripts to actually run whenever we were doing the testing. Recently learned that there was an agent update that may have been contributing to that. But luckily, we've been doing some testing and verifying that things are now fully updated, so we should be good for today, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Now, for anyone who was not here yesterday, that is absolutely okay. You can always refer back to the previous webinar, but we're going to do a little recap today as well. So whenever we're talking about error logging, that is going to be a part of working with almost any script within the system. But to remind you, one of the things that we're going to be doing today is also picking up the same script that we started with yesterday. Now, I'm going to give you all those steps, but I want to provide a reminder that the reason that we're using custom fields in these scripts is because that's where you really get the power of automation. Running any PowerShell script or Bash script or batch script, those are all perfectly fine for being able to get an endpoint to execute commands and functions that you're looking to have performed on that endpoint for configuration management or just for gathering up additional data. But once you gather that data, you want to be able to store it somewhere. And that's where custom fields come into play, from being able to store that information from the system into ASIO so that you can actually reference it and create dynamic groups that are based on the data that's being returned, and being able to use those groups to perform additional actions as well. So if you weren't here, one last reminder about custom fields. We do currently have a 300 character limit, and it rejects any carriage returns, which means you can't have any new lines. We do anticipate a change in that behavior later on this month, but I want to make sure that you're aware of that so that if you try to send over any output from a script to a custom field, if it's over 300 characters or it contains any carriage returns, it will get rejected and you'll see some errors in the system. But yesterday, whenever we were talking about how to actually leverage custom fields, we're going to use that same example today and actually add in some logging. So I've mentioned that the one that we used yesterday, it was a poor design. It was a 2-line script that simply ran that PowerShell for grabbing up the information about whether BitLocker was configured on a device, and if it was, is it turned on or is it turned off? And then after the PowerShell script ran, we then sent the output over to a custom field. Well, today we're going to do a little bit more. Now, for anyone who was not here, feel free to use the step-by-step provided here on the screen for being able to create that script. But we're going to add in 2 new functions to our script today, and that is going to be set user variable and also do a script log. This is going to be very helpful for us whenever we're trying to debug and find out, hey, what actually happened? What data did I get back from that device? And how can I visualize it within the system to determine if it's what I anticipated or expected from it? So with that context, I think we're now ready to kind of switch over to our demo portion. So let me just switch my screen. And here is the script that we used yesterday. Now, again, for anyone who was not here, I'm going to show you what my PowerShell script looks like. Feel free to copy and paste this if you want, or reference it, but it's a very simple script. All it's doing is running a commandlet to be able to determine what is the BitLocker value, BitLocker volume, is it, what's the protection status? And if you don't get a protection status, great. Just say BitLocker feature not installed. That's it. Very simple, straightforward. for BitLocker. And then our second step was to take that BitLocker status and update the custom field with the output. Today, we're going to add in those new steps. So the first thing that you want to do is whenever it comes to those output variables, those outputs can change within the context of the script. Every time you run a different task or PowerShell or batch or bash, whenever you get a result from that endpoint, it's going to get a new output. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to add a new row to set a user variable. And this user variable, I'm going to call it BitLocker. And this value is going to be %output%. And I'm now going to drag and drop this up so that it is the second step. That way, as soon as the PowerShell is done, we're going to take that output and set it to a variable for BitLocker. Now, I'm also going to add another step for a script log. And the script log is going to say BitLocker status from PowerShell. And this is going to be at BitLocker. Now, all I'm doing is putting an @ sign before and after the variable name that I just created. So I will add that and now drag and drop it. You'll see whenever we're looking at that set user variable, while we had the name BitLocker, it does let us know that it begins and ends with an @ sign. And that's how you invoke variables and parameters within these scripts. So if I had a parameter that I had created and I wanted to be able to invoke it within the script, I would simply call the name, put an @ sign at both sides of the name, and now I'm able to reference it as well. So now that we have our PowerShell script, we're going to take the output from the PowerShell script, put it into the variable for BitLocker. We're going to do a script log for BitLocker. And we're then going to take the BitLocker status custom field and update it. Right now, it's still saying output. I actually want to change that so that it's using the variable that we created. So I will call this BitLocker. We'll save. And now I will save my script. And now that that script has been updated, let's go find it. BitLocker status demo. I'm going to schedule this. Now, for our purposes today, I'm going to do the same thing that I did yesterday because I want to actually see this execute for us today while we're on the call. So I'm going to choose next agent check-in, which we discussed yesterday. This is going to run for the next hour. And if a device is online, it's going to run immediately. If the device is not online, we're going to wait up to an hour. And after an hour has passed, we're going to stop waiting for the device to come online. Now let's choose the site that actually has all of my devices, and I'm going to click Run. And now we can see that it is currently running. We'll go pop in. And we'll check the history to see if we already have some results. And today it has succeeded and it is run on 5 devices. I can take a look at this information for the devices where it's successfully run. And I can see BitLocker status from PowerShell, BitLocker feature not installed. Script succeeded, BitLocker status from PowerShell off. Which means now that I know what those values are, because I used the variable which was capturing the output, and I've put it into a script log, if I go to one of these devices, I'll be able to go over to custom fields and see the feature has not been installed. And I also see a timestamp for when it was updated, which was here during the webinar. Now, one of the things that I mentioned yesterday that I want to be able to illustrate as well dynamic groups. So I had mentioned earlier that whenever you use a dynamic group, and I've already created this one based on the criteria of looking at that BitLocker status custom field, and I want to find all devices where it says BitLocker is not installed. Now at the moment it's showing 0 devices. That's because I populated this screen before we ran the script. So if I click somewhere else on the screen and select it again, we're now going to see that there are 3 devices. And if I want to be able to see exactly which 3 devices are currently do not have that BitLocker feature installed, I can select it. It'll open a new tab, and it'll show me a filtered list that only displays the devices where BitLocker is not installed. So now I can actually run an additional script to be able to install BitLocker, get it configured, and you move on from that point in time. But just a couple of things that we wanted to go over today as a follow-up to yesterday. The biggest thing is making sure that whenever you are creating these scripts, make sure to use the variables. So the output, it is good. You can reference it. It is useful if you're doing something very, very simple, but it is highly recommended to actually go through and be able to store that output as a variable so you can reference it multiple times within the script. You can send it over to custom fields. You can put it into a script log. There's a lot of things that you can do with these. Now, in tomorrow's sections, we're going to go into more detail about why we use scripts versus tasks, and also what all of these things are used for. So you'll notice in the list we have a task type of action. And if I filter through, you're going to see we have a bunch of different types in here. We have actions, we have scripts, OS patching, web root action. We're going to talk about some of these tomorrow to give you some of the pros and cons of each of those different items, where they come from, why we have them within the system, and also kind of tell you what the differences are so that you can make the best informed decision around how you want to build out your system to be able to best function for your business. So let's switch back over, and to give a little additional information, I want to point everyone back to our documentation. So if you are watching this live, you can use the QR code. And actually, if you're watching the recording, you can scan the QR code as well. But in the chat, we are also going to have a link to the documentation that you can click. If you don't want to scan the QR code, that's absolutely fine. And with that, we will switch over to questions. So do we have any questions that have been posted in the chat for us? I'm not seeing anything at the moment. We'll give everyone just another moment. Let's say 6 seconds. And I'm not seeing any new comments. So with that, as a reminder, tomorrow, please join us as we do a deep dive into tasks versus scripts, pros and cons of each, where they come from, why to use them. We're really going to do a deep dive to help you feel more informed about how to best leverage these within your organization. And again, thank you everyone for joining today. Apologies for the technical difficulties we had yesterday, but I'm glad we were able to work through it today. Thanks.